Dark Souls has so many damn weapons that you could do a dozen playthroughs and use a different one each time. I know this because I've done so. But what I've never done is finish the game with just the starting gear. It makes sense, of course, it's starting gear. It's supposed to be for starting out, that's what starting out means, for God's sake. But even so, I made a decision I would soon come to regret, and decided to find out just how hard is Dark Souls when you play as the thief. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, yeah, people can beat Dark Souls with just their fists. What's so special about this? Well, what's special about this is that for one, I'm awful at Dark Souls in comparison to most players. And two, doing this will make the game harder than usual due to the fact that it will completely remove a bunch of the crazy buffs that many runs often end up using. For example, I won't be able to pick up the red Tearstone ring in order to give myself the huge damage boost it offers. I also won't be able to use Havel's ring for the equip load bonus, or the Grass Crest shield for the stamina regeneration. What I start off with is what I end up with. Here are the rules. 1. I must use the gear, and only the gear, that my character's class starts off with. That means from start to finish, I must not take that gear off. In this run, that means the Thief's gear. 2. The only rings allowed are the ones that are required to progress through the game. For example, the Covenant of Artorias, which is a must-have for the Four Kings boss fight. 3. This is not a Soul Level 1 run, so leveling up is acceptable. 4. Weapon upgrades, on the other hand, are a completely different story. To make this challenge just a tad harder, I've decided that I will only be allowed to upgrade as a reward for beating the main game bosses. For every boss I beat, I will be able to upgrade my weapon once. 5. If I fail at a boss 5 consecutive times, I'm allowed to utilize one weapon buff during the fight. If I fail 10 times, summoning is allowed, but not required. If I choose to come back to a boss later, that means the counter resets, and I need to fight them 5 more times for this rule to take effect again. 6. Now, I use a throwing knife to kill Guinevere, and while that does kind of contradict the rules, I'm already saying that's fine because the other option is getting the Seance ring, and I'm lazy as hell. Let's begin. I choose the Thief class, of course, for 2 reasons. 1, being that they start with the Master Key, across the board the best starting gift in the game, and the second, the Bandit Dagger, a surprisingly strong starter weapon with an excellent critical damage multiplier and a quick hitting moveset, which allows me to use the dagger's bleed effect to its fullest effect. On top of these 2 excellent parts of the Thief's gear, I also start with the Thief's set of armor, which is honestly a rather weak set overall, and the Target Shield, which is a pretty mediocre shield defense and stability-wise. But thankfully, it's a breeze to parry with. So while I won't be tanking any big attacks, I also won't be entirely defenseless. As a gift, I choose to take the Blackfire Bombs, seeing as how the Master Key is already in my possession. In the beginning, it's smooth sailing all the way to the Asylum Demon fight, taking left through the door to get my gear and circling a long way around to the Fog Gate, where I drop down and, in a perfect way to start the run, don't even try to hit my plunging attack. Marvelous. I then also die because it's me, and of course I die on the tutorial boss. You can already see where this is going. Second time round though, I nail the plunging attack and cruise through the fight by jamming myself up into those big fat cheeks and swinging for the fences. After catching a flight to Firelink Shrine, I let my ego get the best of me and decide to take a stab, pun intended, at Quelaag, taking the back way down into Blighttown with the intent of getting some decent early game souls. As to be expected, my confidence is my downfall, and I find myself hitting the Spider Witch for a ridiculously low amount of damage, getting smashed into putty and barely leaving a scratch on her. I decide to take a second attempt, but it is just as fruitless as the first. A few swings with low damage and then I get crushed, and then I swallow my pride and head back up to Firelink Shrine and to the Undead Burg. Despite a few close calls on the way, it's no struggle to make it to the Taurus Demon, who thanks to a successful plunging attack and the Bandit Dagger's bleed effect, is little more than a hiccup on my quest, gathering me several thousand tasty souls and the levels that come with it. Yes, I did put one into attunement. No, it wasn't intentional, leave me alone. I then try to sprint under the Hellkite Dragon's flames, but my lack of skill in the game gets me wrecked. Several times. So, I choose to go the other way, and make it through to the parish my first try, picking up the Firekeeper soul on the way to get my Estus to +1. Then, our first major boss battle, the Gargoyles. Immediately, I knew I was in for a fight. My damage, despite being slightly better than what I was putting up against Quelaag, was still rather low, and thanks to a solid bleed resistance the Gargoyles possess, I found myself challenged by a boss I usually wouldn't give second thoughts to. I do die once, but I'm not fussed by it. Instead, I choose to use my black firebombs here, as my low damage is a real detriment at this point, and I could really use the levels. These, thankfully, make the fight a cakewalk, dealing excellent damage from far enough away that they can barely return a blow. I actually run out of them too, but thankfully my dagger manages to cut away at the last of the second gargoyle's health bar, giving me the victory. With the gargoyles down, I head down to Andre and get my dagger to +1. And as with Quelaag earlier, my ego gets the best of me and I take a chance at Darkroot Garden, with the intentions of making the Moonlight Butterfly go Moonlight Butter Bye-Bye. That's a bad joke, I'm sorry, I felt bad for that one. Now shockingly, this fight turned out to be an absolute nightmare for me. With no real way other than dodging to deal with the butterfly's hard-hitting magic attacks, and the fact that, which I didn't know prior to this, the butterfly is immune to bleed, I found myself once again in a bad position early on. After one long, but ultimately failed attempt, I decided to head back. I did manage to garner enough souls to get my weapon up to +3 though, so little progress was made, don't worry about it. At this point, I thought to myself, fuck it, and I headed back to the asylum to take on the stray demon. His damage is really good, especially his AoE attacks, which almost kill me a few times. But being that he is such a slow boss, coupled with the bleed effect of the bandit dagger once again proving its worth, I managed to squeak out a victory on my very first try. While I'm there, I also picked up the doll for my vacation to Ariamis later. Up next was a quick detour to New Londo, grabbing myself the second Firekeeper soul, which I then used to boost my Estus once more. Then, it was back to the butterfly. Being that I only had brief windows to damage the butterfly when it rests on the side of the bridge, this fight turned out to take much longer than I expected. So long, in fact, that the butterfly actually pulled out an attack I'd never seen before. Thankfully, though, I'd upgraded my damage output, and it really showed. And after 2 failed attempts, I managed to clip the butterfly's wings, nab myself a bunch more souls, and cross another boss off my list. Next, I did something dumb. I headed into the catacombs with the notoriously easy boss, Pinwheel, on my mind. The run to the boss turned out to be the real fight, but I kept on, believing that that was the best way forward. After several failed trips, and one rather unfortunate death to Pinwheel himself, I claimed my victory against the Necromancer, and hilariously, got the Mask of the Child. I think for the first time I had ever played this game, it actually dropped for me. A real fucking shame that I couldn't use it. Heading back up to the Undead Burg, I took the gold pine resin that I hadn't acquired earlier, as I was under the impression that my next challenge would be the first where a buff would have to come into play. Thankfully though, the Capra Demon was not at all bad. I managed to take the ledge straight away and deal with both the dogs before cutting down the demon itself on my first try. Bleed damage is fantastic in this game, I don't know if you know that yet. Grabbing the large ember from the depths and heading back to Andre allowed me to get my dagger to +6. And then it was time to man up and headed back down to Blighttown once again, with Revenge on Quelaag on my agenda. With my damage now being almost 4 times what it was earlier, an absolutely staggering 39 for every 2-handed light attack, I found myself in for yet another long fight. I found I was most effective when I turned the fight into a bit of a guerrilla warfare situation, pacing myself, striking at Quelaag's weakest moments and then sprinting away before she could strike back. Eventually my patience paid off, and I managed to fell Quelaag on my second attempt and ring the second bell. The Ceaseless Discharge came up next, and everyone's favourite joke of a boss went down without a fuss, lowering the lava for my future trek into Izalith. But, for the moment, it was up to Sen's Fortress for me. It's a simple sprint through the fortress, seeing as how there was nothing there I wanted or was allowed to use, beyond the large Titanite shards that are found scattered throughout, of course. But then, I ran into the Iron Golem. See, the Iron Golem isn't usually a hard fight. You lure him to the bridge on the far side of the arena, you wail on his feet like a damn lunatic until he stumbles, and then you watch him tumble over the edge like a fat girl on a coffee table. But unfortunately for me, my wonderful little dagger, even at +6 at this point, was just not dealing the damage needed to achieve this. This, partnered with how insane the golem hits with every attack, and the ridiculous hitbox on his grab, and I found myself hitting the proverbial brick wall. So, my best bet was to beat him outright. And after several long attempts, some of which ended in the least fortunate deaths I think I've ever had while playing this game, I managed to beat the golem down and secure my way to Anor Londo. Again, since there was nothing for me to pick up, I just sprint through the City of the Gods, across the rafters, past the arches, and into the castle without a hitch. I meet the giant blacksmith and get my dagger to +9, and head out to fight everyone's favorite duo, Ornstein and Smo. Straight away, I notice that Smo is not strong against bleed, so I take to focusing on him in the first phase. After an attempt or two, though, I switch to Ornstein, realizing that due to the fact that Hyper Ornstein is a far harder fight than Super Smo in the second phase, it would be to my benefit to have an enemy weaker to my weapon's special effects in the second phase rather than the first. I definitely made the right decision, but it still was not an easy fight. I always fall into the trap of focusing my attention on one enemy in the first phase, a trait that leads me to get my ass handed to me several times, before I finally break the bad habit and start seeing success. Kiting Smo's huge digging swing attack into the broken pillars, and dodging around Ornstein as he leaps at me, allows me to slash at the Dragon Slayer a few times before I clear off. It's basically foolproof, and despite dying once more to the most ridiculous death ever, where Smo was teleported behind me after the mid-fight cutscene, I managed to finish both of them off on my 7th attempt. After a quick visit to my future wife, I kill her, ending the illusion and opening up the path to Gwendolyn. I take that chance to fight him, and despite my dagger's damage drop-off really starting to show, I kill the twink with relative ease. Now, you might have been thinking, but Kyle, you missed the boss, and you'd be right. See, I hadn't killed the gaping dragon yet. But the thing is that I just didn't see the point of fighting him earlier when I already have the master key to get to Blighttown. But, since this is an all-bosses run, I make the journey to the deep dark depths and put him to rest. He's a really simple fight. Not much to talk about. It's all the way back to Darkroot Garden now, where Artorias' faithful companion Sif is waiting for me. Another relatively straightforward fight. I die once due to a mistimed roll, but on my second attempt, I put the poor pooch out to pasture, so to speak. I take a quick detour on my way back, cutting the heads off the Hydra and meeting my girl Dusk, and then it's back to Firelink to place the Lord Vessel and open up the second half of the game. I choose Seath to be my first Lord Soul, thinking his slow, easily read attacks would fall into my favor. So, heading into the archives, I waste no time heading through, coming to a head with the Scaleless Beast in the Crystal Caves. Unsurprisingly, as this run has shown, I did awful. My dagger could not work its magic on Seath, even when hitting him in his weak point, and after some really bad luck, like a couple of the giant oysters sneaking into the boss room with me, getting cursed after I died, or walking right into one of Seath's double tail smashes, I decided to take a breather and headed off after some other prey. I then thought to myself, maybe the Sanctuary Guardian would be a good idea. The easiest boss of the DLC, according to some. But, as other choices in this run have shown, I'm a moron. I've never been that good at the DLC bosses, but seeing as how the Guardian had a weakness to my precious bleed, I thought I'd take a crack at him. Bad idea. Immediately, began getting trashed worse by the Guardian than with any boss on the run so far. The Sanctuary Guardian's quick movesets and constant aggression partnered well with the fact that I was only doing 64 damage per basic attack, and this meant another long battle. I'm not gonna lie, I raged a bit. I just couldn't get my dodge timing down, and after roughly a dozen or so attempts, I called a sabbatical and headed off to Izalith. My first run at the Fire Sage left me with a bad taste in my mouth as I got absolutely flattened without putting a scratch on him. But he proved to be no competition for me the second time round, the bleed damage taking chunks out of his fat ass and giving me the massive boost of confidence I sorely needed after my string of failures. Centipede, on the other hand, was a different story. Like the Iron Golem, this boss has a grab attack that literally seems to teleport you into its grasp. But its otherwise met damage and easily telegraphed attacks allowed me to get the best of him on my second try, putting the Centipede Demon in the dirt. Or lava, as is the case. The run through Izalith itself wasn't so bad, especially with the ring that allows you to traverse the lava safely. Now, I consider this ring a requirement, so it fits into the rules. But when it comes to the Bed of Chaos itself, I found myself getting trounced multiple times due to my terrible awareness, lack of jumping ability, and rolling straight into fire like a goddamn fool. Eventually, though, I managed to cut a path to the heart of the beast and claim victory and my first Lord Soul. After this, I head into the Painted World, as I had completely forgotten to fight Priscilla when I was in Anor Londo earlier. The run-through is simple enough, but I spend several minutes taking out the rotten dragon corpse that spits its grape drink everywhere. Priscilla herself wasn't anything to write home about. Apart from a few mistakes on my part, such as rolling straight into one of her attacks, Bleed once again does its job and makes quick work of her. Then, I came to an impasse. I could go fight Seath again and get trashed. I could fight Nito, more than likely getting trashed. Or, I could head to the Four Kings, the fight I dread the most in the main game, and almost certainly get trashed. So I picked the Sanctuary Guardian. And wouldn't you know it, I got trashed. Over and over and over again. But, after nearly a half a dozen tries, I realized something. See, my biggest issue with this boss has always been my inability to dodge certain attacks. No matter where I went, I would always seem to end up in a position to get hit. But my eyes were opened after this many attempts at this nightmare of a boss, and I noticed that this entire time, I was just dodging too close to the beast. Once I realized this, the entire fight changed. And with my dagger being at plus 10 by this point, I managed to put the Sanctuary Guardian down and head into Urseal. Before fighting Artorias, I went to New Londo, drained the water, got the very large ember, and farmed myself some chunks to get my weapon up to plus 15. Then, I took another stab at Seath. And despite a few unlucky attempts, including the worst possible decision I ever could have made in a fight, which somehow ended with me getting stuck in the worst possible place I ever could have in the fight, Seath finally fell, and I had another Lord Soul crossed off my list. Then, it was time to face my fears and walk into that deep dark abyss to face the Four Kings. I was dreading this fight, because my usual strat for these guys is to just tank their hits with the Giant's armor, or Havel's armor. I've never actually fought them without it. To my surprise though, I ended up finding this to be the easiest Lord Soul so far, doing just enough damage with my little pig sticker to keep the ghastly rollers at bay and beating them on my very first try to collect their soul. I then went to Nito, my confidence at an all-time high after my utter dominance against the Kings. Usually hanging at the back of the arena means that the big bony fellas won't be able to attack. But, being me, I ignore that logic because I have to make things hard for myself. So, I found myself running around Nito's domain like a headless chicken, waiting for the Lord of the Dead to knock over his own minions with his own attacks, and then swinging at Nito myself. It's a struggle, I won't lie, but the damage eventually gets too much for Nito to take, and he too falls at my feet. All 4 Lord Souls are now mine, and it's time for the rest of the DLC. Artorias, the badass son of a gun who walked into darkness with his head up and the simple goal to fuck things up. He's no real weaknesses, and my tiny dagger does piss weak damage to him, so I did what we all do when we have to fight Artorias. I got good. The strategy is really the same as any other boss fight. Hit and run. Let Artorias swing at you, roll out the way, swing at him once or twice, and roll out the way. Rinse and repeat. My rustiness with this game really showed in this fight because I died several times to my own glaring mistakes. Taking stabs when I shouldn't, rolling the wrong way into attacks, or getting too aggressive in order to try and speed the fight up. You do that with Artorias and you're going to have a bad time. It turns out to be a long fight, one that actually punishes your mistakes the longer the fight goes. But in the end, the stars aligned in my favor, and I put an end to poor Artorias once and for all. Now, for all the dread I had for the Four Kings in the main game, I had about 50 times more for Calamite in the DLC. This gigantic bastard of a dragon has the worst hitboxes in the game, with some attacks hitting you from like 3 feet away from where you are. You only get a few brief moments to escape before his really powerful Calamity Eye snatches you up, and each of his Flame Breath attacks deals incredible damage. All of this is stacked on top of an insanely large health pool and non-existent weaknesses, and it makes him the hardest boss in the entire run. It took me 3 days of getting crushed under his feet, being burnt to a crisp, and getting run over dozens of times before I get him. The bleed damage my dagger works up is completely pointless now as well, because not only is he resistant to it, I barely have enough time to get 2 swings in before I'm on the defensive. It's a nightmare. By far the most rage-inducing boss of the entire run. But, like all of those before him, he does eventually fall to my blade. And finally, with just one boss to go before Gwyn himself, I ventured into darkness like Artorias before me with the goal of killing Manus. Some say he's the hardest boss in the game. I would agree, but Calamite exists. Though that's not to say I have an easy time with him. Everything Manus does hits really hard, and even at 33 vitality like my build has at this point, his crazy bitch fit attack can chew through your health bar like it's nothing. It took 2 days of attempts to get Manus down, learning from every mistake, getting pissed off at the fact that my precious bandit dagger's range is too short to hit him sometimes, even when he's standing right in front of me. Learning when to strike and when not to, how to avoid his insanely strong magic attacks by rolling at the right time, or reacting quickly enough to sprint towards him before you're overwhelmed, leads to victory after over 30 attempts. So much hair pulled out, and a bunch of screaming expletives that would get me kicked off of YouTube if I were to repeat them here. And of course, that means that only Gwyn was left. And with the Bandit Dagger's insane crit multiplier and the target shield's excellent parrying, I offered the Lord Souls to open the Kiln of the First Flame, walked through the final fog door, and got trashed. It really would have been great if I had have kicked his ass the first attempt, but my timing was off and there was something in my eye. And there was a bird in my window, so my other eye was fixed on that, so don't worry. Seriously though, on my second try, I got the parries down, and with my dagger dealing excellent damage off the critical attacks, Gwyn fell at my feet. So there you have it. Dark Souls with only the Thief's gear. This run was so weird. Certain bosses, which I never would have had trouble fighting before, such as the Moonlight Butterfly, were far more dangerous than I ever would have expected them to be. And some bosses like the Four Kings turned out to be far easier than I ever would have anticipated. It just goes to show how crazily different this game can be when you play it in different ways. At points, it felt like I was playing the game for the first time as well. I was running into metaphorical walls and I had no clue what direction I should go next. As for the gear, the Thief's gear, which let's be honest is carried by the fact that it gets the Master Key, isn't the best overall for a starting class in my opinion. But the bleed buildup of the Bandit Dagger really came through for me in times of need, and, despite its massive damage drop-off, really required on me being better at the game to succeed. It was an odd situation. If you like this video, let me know what class you want to see next. Thank you for watching. Till next time, bye-bye.